The king's wolf had not moved from its courtyard in 11 years. It did not eat unless it chose to. It did not sleep unless it wanted to. 3 senior commanders had tried to approach it in the last decade. One lost 2 fingers, one lost his nerve entirely, and one simply never spoke of it again. Every person in the palace knew one rule above all others. You do not go near the wolf. She went near the wolf. Not on purpose. Not out of bravery or ambition or some desperate plan to change her fate. She took a wrong turn on the way to the 3rd floor records office. She was carrying 17 documents, an ink seal, and a cup of tea that had already gone cold. She was thinking about whether she had copied the Eastern inventory numbers correctly. And then she looked up, and it was right there. Black as a collapsed star. Silent as a held breath. The size of a war horse and twice as dangerous. Every guard on the upper wall had stopped moving. The entire courtyard had gone completely still. It looked at her. She looked at it. And then it walked toward her. She had a name that appeared on exactly 2 official documents in the entire palace system. The first was her original employment record, filed 3 years ago when she passed her basic clerical examination by the narrowest possible margin. 2 points above the cutoff, which her supervising officer had noted in the margins with the word barely underlined twice. The second was a reassignment form from 8 months ago, when her desk had been moved from the main records hall to a side corridor because a senior officer needed the space for additional filing cabinets. Not for his own files, for the overflow from another officer's office. Her desk had been relocated so that someone else's paperwork would have more room. No one had asked her. The desk had simply been gone when she arrived one morning, and a junior porter had pointed wordlessly toward the corridor. That was her life in the palace. Not cruel. Not dramatic. Simply small. She existed in the spaces between important things. She carried reports that other people wrote to offices where other people would read them. She copied numbers from one ledger to another. She stamped documents with an ink seal that had her department's insignia on it and absolutely nothing else. No name, no rank identifier, just the department. As if even the seal understood that she specifically was not the point. Her colleagues were not unkind to her. That would have required noticing her. The senior clerk spoke over her in meetings. The junior officers handed her files without making eye contact. Once, a commander had asked her to fetch tea, looked directly at her face while making the request, and then 3 minutes later asked a passing porter where the clerk had gone. She had been standing 2 feet to his left holding the tea. She had stopped expecting to be seen. It was not bitterness. It was simply the shape her life had taken. The way water takes the shape of whatever container it is poured into. She was poured into a very small container, and she had adjusted accordingly. Her one area of quiet competence was accuracy. Her numbers were never wrong. Her copies were never smudged. Her reports arrived on time, correctly formatted, exactly as requested. No one commented on this. Accuracy was expected. Inaccuracy would have been noticed. The distinction mattered to her more than she admitted to herself. On the morning everything changed, she had been assigned to deliver a stack of 17 documents to the 3rd floor records office. Standard procedure. She had done it dozens of times. But the palace's eastern wing was undergoing renovation, and 3 corridor routes had been rerouted without any formal announcement. The notice had been posted on a board that she would have passed if she had come from the main hall. But she had come from the side corridor where her relocated desk lived, and she had not seen it. She took the second left instead of the third. Then a right instead of a left. Then a staircase that went down instead of up. And then she pushed open a heavy door at the bottom of a stone stairwell, stepped out into cold morning fog, and found herself standing in the lower eastern courtyard. She knew immediately that she was in the wrong place. She had never been to this part of the palace, but she knew, everyone knew, what the lower eastern courtyard was. It was the Wolf's Courtyard. The place no one went. The place that appeared on internal maps with a small notation that said restricted access. No personnel, and which every new employee was told about on their first day with a seriousness that suggested the warning was not administrative but deeply personal. She should have gone back through the door immediately. She knew this. Her hand was still on the door handle. She was already half-turned to go. And then she heard it. Or rather, she didn't hear it, which was the thing that stopped her. The courtyard was completely silent. No birds. No distant voices from other wings. No wind moving through the fog. A silence so complete and so specific that it didn't feel like the absence of sound. It felt like something holding its breath. She turned around. It was standing 20 feet from her, and it was the largest living thing she had ever seen up close. She had heard descriptions. Everyone had heard descriptions. But descriptions did not prepare you for the actual physical reality of an animal that stood at the shoulder height of a grown man, whose paws on the stone were each the size of a serving platter, whose eyes caught the gray morning light and held it like two pieces of dark amber pressed from the inside with something that was not quite fire, but was not anything lesser either. It was looking at her with an expression she could not name. Not aggression. Not territorial warning. Something older and more deliberate than either of those things. The kind of attention that suggested it had already made a decision and was waiting for her to catch up. She did not run. Later, people would call this bravery, and she would not correct them because the truth was less impressive. Her legs had simply stopped responding to instructions. She stood completely still, holding 17 documents and a cold cup of tea, and looked back at it because there was nothing else to do. It moved toward her. Each step slow, deliberate, placed with a care that made the silence around it even deeper. It stopped when it was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from its body. Close enough that she could see the individual texture of the black fur along its chest, which was level with her face. Then it lowered its head. Not to the ground. To her. Its nose pressed gently against her sternum, directly over her heartbeat. And it stayed there, still breathing slowly, as if it was listening to something that only it could hear. On the upper walls of the courtyard, 6 palace guards stood in complete silence. None of them moved. None of them called out. 2 of them, she would later learn, had been guards for over 15 years and had never in that time seen the wolf initiate physical contact with any living creature. One of them, a senior wall guard named Eric, who was not known for sentiment, would write in his personal log that evening. It chose her. I don't know what that means yet. But it chose her, and we all saw it, and nothing is going to be the same. She was still holding the 17 documents. Not one page had fallen. She filed her report. That is the detail that spread through the palace faster than anything else. Faster than the account from the wall guards. Faster than the whispered versions that accumulated embellishments with each retelling. Faster even than the emergency note the head of palace security sent to the first commander before the morning was half over. What people could not stop talking about in the quiet corners of offices and the careful silences of shared meals was the fact that after it happened, after the wolf, after the courtyard, after 6 witnesses on the upper walls, she had gone back upstairs, found the correct corridor, located the 3rd floor records office, and delivered her documents. All 17. Correctly stamped. On time. The clerk who received them had heard nothing yet. He had stamped them back without looking up, filed them in the correct drawer, and wished her a routine morning. She had said thank you and walked back to her desk in the side corridor and begun copying the next set of inventory numbers. By midday, her name, which had appeared on exactly 2 official documents in 3 years, had been spoken aloud in 7 separate offices, 2 strategy rooms, and once, according to a porter who claimed to have been passing in the corridor at the right moment, in the private chamber of the first commander himself. Nobody came to speak to her directly. Not yet. That was the thing she noticed. The silence around her had changed its quality. Before, it had been the silence of invisibility, of being genuinely unregistered by the people around her. Now it was a different kind of silence. The kind that happens when people are very carefully not looking at something while looking at it constantly. She could feel the difference the way you can feel a change in air pressure before a storm, even when the sky still looks clear. She kept copying numbers. The numbers were the same as they had always been. The ink was the same. The ledger was the same. Everything was the same and nothing was the same, and she was not sure what to do with that distinction. So she did nothing with it and copied numbers instead. At the 3rd hour of the afternoon, a junior officer she had never spoken to came to her corridor, stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking, and then said that the first commander wished to see her. He said it the way people say things when they are not sure whether they are delivering good news or something considerably worse, and have decided that a neutral tone is the safest option available. She asked if she should bring her current files. He stared at her, said no, led her down 3 corridors and a staircase, and then stopped outside a door that was not the first commander's office. She had delivered documents near his office twice and knew what that corridor looked like, and told her to wait inside. It was a holding room. Stone walls. 1 table. 2 chairs. A narrow window that looked out onto an interior courtyard that was not the wolf's courtyard. She sat down. She still had her ink seal in her pocket. She put it on the table so it would not press into her leg. She waited for 40 minutes. The first commander did not come. His deputy came instead, a tall, carefully controlled woman named Sela, who had the particular manner of someone who manages dangerous situations by refusing to acknowledge that they are dangerous. She sat across from the table, folded her hands on the surface, and explained several things in a voice of absolute administrative calm. What happened in the courtyard was being reviewed. The wolf's behavior was a sensitive matter of palace security. Until the review was complete, she was not to discuss the incident with any other staff members, any visiting officials, or any persons outside the palace. She was not to return to the lower eastern courtyard for any reason. She was not to raise the matter with her supervisors or seek any kind of documentation regarding the incident. She would be watched, not as a punitive measure, the deputy was careful to say, but as a standard security protocol in situations of this nature. She asked what situations of this nature meant, exactly, given that the wolf had not done anything like this in 270 years. The deputy looked at her for a moment, said that the protocols existed regardless, said that she was free to return to her desk, said it in a way that meant the meeting was over and she should go now. She went. She stopped at a water basin in the corridor to wash the ink off her fingers from the morning's copying work. She looked at her hands in the water for a moment, then dried them and walked back toward the side corridor and her desk. She did not go directly back. She told herself later that she had genuinely forgotten the ink seal in the holding room and needed to retrieve it. This was partially true. She had left the seal on the table. She did need it. It was department property and she was responsible for it, and she did not want to file a loss report because loss reports required a supervisor's signature, and a supervisor's signature would require a supervisor to notice her, and the current situation already involved more being noticed than she was accustomed to. But she took the long route to get back to the holding room. The long route passed near the lower eastern courtyard. Not through it, just near it. She walked past the outer wall, not intending to stop, and then stopped. Through the iron gate, she could see it. The wolf. It was standing at the far end of the courtyard, facing her direction. Not moving. Just standing. She stood there for what was probably 30 seconds, but felt much longer. Then she retrieved her seal from the holding room and went back to her desk. That night, lying in her quarters in the staff wing, she stared at the ceiling and thought about the way it had pressed its head against her chest. Not the size of it, not the danger of it, not the implications of it. Just that specific gesture. The gentleness of it. As if, of all the things in this palace full of power and rank and consequence, she was the one thing it had decided to be careful with. She did not know what to do with that. She went to sleep. She had numbers to copy in the morning. The campaign against her did not announce itself. That was the sophisticated cruelty of it. It arrived dressed as bureaucracy, as routine, as the ordinary friction of institutional life, so that at no point could she point to a specific moment and say, "Here, this is where it began, this is who decided it." It simply accumulated around her like water finding its way through stone. Slow, quiet, inevitable feeling. It started with access. The palace operated on a clearance system for different floors and wings. Most junior clerks had access to 3 or 4 standard routes, and no more, which was normal and unremarkable. Within 4 days of the courtyard incident, 2 of her standard access routes were quietly revoked. No memo. No explanation. Her identification simply stopped working on those corridor doors when she pressed it to the reader. She had to reroute. The reroutes added time. The added time made her deliveries slightly late. Slightly late deliveries created a small notation in her performance record. That was how it worked. Not a sudden blow. A series of small, deniable adjustments that accumulated into a pattern she could feel, but could not formally name. Her reports began arriving at their destinations with routing errors. Sent to the wrong sub-office, returned to her for redelivery, by which point they were late enough to matter. Her desk was moved a second time, deeper into the storage corridor, where the light was poor and the morning cold came through a gap in the stone that no one had ever bothered to seal. A senior clerk stopped including her in the morning briefings. Not by removing her name from the list, but by scheduling the briefings 10 minutes earlier without updating the general notice board. Only the individual notifications that did not include her. She noticed all of it. She said nothing about any of it. She adjusted, rerouted, arrived earlier, copied by poor light, and continued doing her work with the accuracy that no one commented on. The wolf came on the 5th day. She was at her desk in the deep storage corridor when she heard the sound, or, again, the absence of sound, that specific held-breath silence she had learned to recognize, move through the main hall outside. Then voices, urgent and low. Then the sound of people stepping back from something. And then nothing for a long moment. She stood up and looked through the gap in the corridor door. The wolf was sitting in the main hall. Outside her corridor entrance. It had walked through the palace's primary public hall, past the entry chamber, past the duty officers' stations, past the morning filing lines and the document processing desks, and sat down outside the door to her storage corridor, as if this was something it did regularly. As if this was exactly where it meant to be. No one in the main hall moved. A senior officer who had been walking toward the eastern staircase had stopped mid-stride and appeared to be conducting an internal negotiation about whether his destination was truly important enough to require walking past it. A group of junior clerks near the processing desks had formed a tight cluster near the far wall in the way that small groups of people do when they want very much to leave a space but cannot agree on a direction. The wolf looked at none of them. It looked at her door. She opened the door. It turned its head toward her with the patient, considered attention of something that has been waiting a reasonable amount of time and is pleased to see that its patience has been rewarded. It did not move to enter the corridor. It simply sat there, outside, and looked at her with those amber-dark eyes. She went back to her desk. The wolf stayed outside her door for 6 hours. Every senior officer who needed to access the storage corridor that day took the alternative route through the North Passage, which added 11 minutes to the journey each way. Nobody said anything about this. Nobody filed a complaint. The wolf was not, technically, doing anything wrong. It was sitting in a corridor that happened to be adjacent to all of their routes. Quietly, on the 8th day, she was called to a lower council meeting room. Not her section's council, which would have made sense, but the lower administrative council, which handled issues that were too minor for formal review but too persistent to ignore. A council member she had never met, a middle-aged administrator named Foss who had the careful eyes of someone who had survived 3 changes of senior leadership by being useful to whoever was currently in power, sat across from her and made her an offer. He framed it as an opportunity, a recognition of her unique position. Given what had occurred with the wolf, given the, he paused here and chose his word carefully, attention she had received, there were parties within the palace who felt she might be well suited to a more visible role. A coordinator position in the Eastern Communications Office. A promotion, in other words. Real rank. A desk with natural light. Her name on official documents. In exchange, she would provide informal updates on the wolf's behavior as she observed it. Nothing classified. Nothing formal. Simply observations. What it did near her. How it responded. Whether there were patterns. She understood exactly what he was asking, and exactly who he was asking it for, and exactly what the information would be used for. She said she didn't feel she had any useful observations to offer. He smiled in a way that meant he didn't believe her, and said the offer would remain open. 3 days later, word reached her, through the particular back channels of junior staff, which carried information with remarkable speed and accuracy, that she had been seen entering the lower council room. By that evening, the fragile, unnamed thing that had begun to shift in her direction, the small, careful attention of people recalculating, of junior officers glancing at her with something other than nothing, collapsed. The people who had briefly looked at her looked away again. Whatever she had been in the process of becoming in their estimation, she was no longer it. She was now a different kind of problem. The formal notice came the next morning. A technical review of her original field certification had identified an outstanding compliance matter related to her failed ranking assessments. Pending resolution, she was to be temporarily reassigned to the Outer District Records Post, 3rd District East, effective immediately. She had until end of day to collect her belongings. She read the notice twice, set it down, began to pack. She did not have very much. The ink seal, 3 reference ledgers, a spare copying brush. It fit into one box. She carried it out of the storage corridor, through the main hall, toward the palace's outer gate. The wolf fell into step beside her at the entrance to the main hall. It walked with her through the corridor, through the entry chamber, past the duty officers who stepped aside in complete silence, through the outer gate, onto the road. The wolf had not been outside the palace grounds in living memory. Not in the memory of the oldest guard currently serving, not in the recorded logs of the security rotations, not in any account that any person currently alive could point to and say, "I saw it leave," or "I know someone who saw it leave." It had existed within those walls for so long that its presence inside them had become a kind of permanent feature, like the stone itself, like the weight of the old foundations, something that simply was, and had always been, and would always be. And now it was standing on a public road. Citizens passing the outer gate on their morning business stopped walking. A merchant's cart horse, coming the other direction, refused to move forward at all and had to be led off the road entirely. A group of school children being walked in a line by their teacher stopped in a perfectly synchronized moment of collective shock, and the teacher, to her credit, simply held up her hand and kept them still and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was going to be adequate. The wolf walked beside her at the pace she walked, which was the measured, practical pace of someone carrying a box of belongings and trying to determine the most efficient route to the 3rd District East. She was reading a copy of the reassignment notice to confirm the address. She was aware of the wolf. She was aware, in a peripheral way, of the people stopping around her. She had run out of the capacity to be surprised by the situation and was now in a phase of simply continuing to exist within it and seeing what happened next. What happened next was hoofbeats. She heard them before she saw the horse, a single rider, coming fast from the palace gate, then slowing to a stop on the road ahead of her. Then more behind the first. Then silence, as whoever had arrived waited for her to cover the distance between them. She looked up from the reassignment notice. The Alpha King was on a dark gray horse in the middle of the road, 6 of his personal guard fanned behind him. He was not wearing formal court attire. He was in riding clothes, which meant he had left quickly, which meant something had been communicated to him recently, and he had come immediately. His face held the particular controlled stillness of someone who has spent decades training themselves to show nothing and occasionally, in moments of genuine surprise, succeeds almost completely. He looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at him. Then the wolf looked at her. In the particular way it had been looking at her since the first morning, with the full, deliberate, considered weight of something that has made up its mind. She stopped walking. Not because she recognized the political gravity of the moment, not because she was intimidated by the mounted guard, not because she understood what was about to happen. She stopped because there was a very large horse directly in her path, and she was not going to walk into it. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The road was silent except for the wind. He dismounted. Later, in the accounts that would be written, in the conversations that would happen in every level of the palace hierarchy for years afterward, this was the moment people returned to. Not the wolf's behavior. Not the subsequent events. This specific moment. The Alpha King dismounting on a public road to stand at ground level with a junior records clerk who was carrying a box with an ink seal and 3 reference ledgers in it. He walked toward the wolf. The wolf watched him approach with the attentive, measuring look it had given every person who had ever approached it. Every commander, every officer, every official who had at various points in the past 2 centuries believed that patience or authority, or the right combination of both, would eventually bring the animal to their side. He stopped 3 feet from it. The wolf stepped sideways. Not toward him. Sideways, angling its body so that it stood closer to her, its shoulder now parallel with her arm. Its orientation changed so that the message, if anyone present needed it explained, was not available for misinterpretation. The Alpha King stood very still. Every member of his personal guard stood very still. The merchant whose horse had refused to move stood very still. The school children, who had followed at a safe distance, and were now pressed against a low wall along the road with their teacher, having given up on the concept of an orderly line, stood very still. He turned. Not toward his guard. Not toward the road ahead. He turned toward the palace gate, where his first commander had ridden out behind him and now sat on his horse at the edge of the road. The first commander who had signed the reassignment notice, who had built the quiet, bureaucratic architecture of the last 2 weeks designed to make her disappear without any single point of obvious pressure. The Alpha King looked at him for what could not have been more than 5 seconds. The first commander's face changed in a way that made several people watching from various distances feel that they were witnessing something they would not repeat in public. The king said 4 words, quietly enough that only the 2 of them heard them. Then he turned back to the road. By the time she returned to the palace the next morning, in a palace vehicle, with an escort that she had not requested and did not know how to respond to, The first commander's office was being cleared by administrative staff. His rank insignia was already in the formal return registry. No announcement had been made. No explanation had been offered. The people who had built the access restrictions rerouted her deliveries and moved her desk twice understood, with the particular clarity of people who have just watched someone else make an irreversible professional miscalculation, that certain matters had been resolved. He was waiting at the palace gate when the vehicle arrived. He looked at her in the full, direct way he had not looked at her before. Not at the situation, not at the wolf now walking behind her, not at the various institutional implications of the last several days. At her, he said. What was in the report? She looked at him. Sir, the report you were trying to deliver. The morning this began. What was in it? She told him. Eastern Storage Wing inventory numbers. Quarterly update. Routine filing. Something moved in his expression. Not amusement. Something that had more weight than amusement and considerably more consequence. She was not given a ceremony. There was no formal appointment, no public announcement read in the throne hall, no new title added to the palace registry with her name attached. The Alpha King did not call a council meeting. He did not issue a decree. What happened instead was quieter than any of those things, and more permanent than all of them combined. An office appeared. That was how she experienced it. She was escorted down a corridor on the palace's second level, a corridor she had never been in before, and shown a room that had been prepared. Stone walls, yes, but wide windows that looked out over the eastern grounds rather than into a storage gap. A proper desk, not a relocated one. Shelves already fitted with the reference systems her work required. An adjoining anteroom with a secondary access door. The office was adjacent to the Alpha King's strategy room, separated from it by a single corridor and a guard post. No one told her why. No one explained what her role was now, officially, or how it would be recorded in the palace employment system. The administrator who showed her the room said only that the space was assigned to her, that her access would be updated by end of day, and that if she had supply requirements, she should submit them to the second-level office in the usual way. She stood in the doorway for a moment, set her box down on the desk. Then she unpacked the ink seal, the 3 reference ledgers, and the copying brush. Arranged them where they made practical sense. Sat down. Pulled out the report she had been in the middle of when the reassignment notice had arrived, Eastern Storage, quarterly inventory, and found where she had left off. The wolf settled outside her door before she had finished the first page. The palace recalibrated itself around these 2 facts, the office and the wolf, with the particular efficiency of an institution that has survived multiple centuries by understanding, quickly and correctly, where power has moved. The senior officers who had walked past her storage corridor in careful silence now walked past her second-level office in a different kind of silence. The ones who had been involved in the access revocations and the routing errors and the desk relocations performed their recalibration with particular thoroughness. She observed this without comment. The junior staff, the clerks, the porters, the filing assistants, the people whose desks were in corridors because corridors were what was available, observed it differently. She did not speak to most of them directly. She did not need to. They saw the office. They saw the wolf. They saw that she had come from a storage corridor with a box containing an ink seal and 3 ledgers, and she had done nothing unusual to arrive here except take a wrong turn, and they held that fact quietly inside themselves like something useful. The news traveled outward from the palace with the speed of information that carries genuine consequence. Not through formal diplomatic channels. Those would come later, careful and worded and attached to specific political requests. First, it traveled the way important things always travel. Through the people who carry messages between places, through merchants at border crossings, through the junior staff of visiting delegations who talk to each other while their superiors are in formal meetings. What they said was this: the Alpha King's wolf had chosen. And who it had chosen was not a general, not a commander, not anyone who had reached for it or trained for it or built a career around the hope of it. It had chosen someone who had been trying to deliver a routine report to the third-floor records office and taken a wrong turn. This detail, the wrong turn, the routine report, the cold cup of tea, was the part that traveled farthest and fastest, because it was the part that no political framework could adequately contain or explain, and things that cannot be explained by existing frameworks require immediate reconsideration of the frameworks. 3 allied kingdoms sent quiet, careful messages within the week. Two kingdoms that had been positioning themselves as potential adversaries sent quieter messages. Everyone was reviewing their calculations. The wolf had not chosen a warrior. It had chosen whatever she was. And no one, including the Alpha King, was entirely sure yet what that meant, which was, in political terms, more destabilizing than certainty in any direction. She delivered her original report on the 14th day. She carried it from her new office to the third-floor records office, the correct route this time, through the correct corridors, without any wrong turns. She placed it on the intake desk. The clerk on duty took it without looking up, began to process it, then looked up. Looked at her. Looked at the wolf visible through the corridor window behind her, sitting patiently in the passage. The clerk stamped the report. With slightly unsteady hands, but he stamped it. Filed it in the correct drawer. Gave her the confirmation receipt. She said thank you and walked back. The report was now 3 weeks late. The Eastern storage inventory numbers it contained were no longer current. As a piece of logistical information, it had been superseded by the next quarterly cycle. She filed the confirmation receipt in her new desk and noted it as closed. That evening, the Alpha King stood alone in the lower eastern courtyard for the first time in years. The wolf was not there. It was outside her office on the second level. The courtyard was empty in a way that was unfamiliar to him, a way that registered somewhere between absence and release. And he was not yet sure which it was, or whether it mattered, or whether the distinction would eventually resolve itself into something he had a word for. He stood there for a while, then walked away. On her desk the following morning, when she arrived, was a sealed document. No sender name, no official insignia, just the palace's internal routing mark and her office as the destination. Inside was a single line in administrative script. Your access has been updated. All levels. No restrictions. She read it, set it down, pulled out her current files. She had numbers to copy. And then a second document arrived. Small, sealed with dark wax. Not the palace seal. Not any insignia she recognized. Just wax, pressed with a flat surface rather than a carved stamp, as if whoever had sent it had not wanted to be identified, but had wanted it closed. She opened it. 3 words, in a script she did not recognize from any kingdom she had studied. We saw the wolf. She looked at it for a long moment. Set it beside the access document. Picked up her copying brush. Dipped it in ink. And began.